3 months before my wedding, sleep never came. The house was quiet, but my mind stayed wide awake. And then, from the hallway, I heard my husband lower his voice. He said something to his mother that made my hands turn cold. Once she signs that paper, she won't leave this house on her own again. Their laughter followed, soft, careless, as if I were already gone. Standing there behind the door, I understood the truth all at once. The man I was about to marry wasn't waiting for a future with me. He was waiting for my signature, my money, and my silence. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I let them believe they had already won. Because when greedy people think the money is secured, they expose themselves in the most expensive ways. 3 months earlier, none of this existed in my mind. Back then, Mark felt like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was still saying. We met during a rainy afternoon in Seattle. I ducked into an open house just to escape the cold. He was the realtor, smiling easily, talking about hardwood floors and natural light, as if those things actually mattered. By the end of the tour, he was asking me where I usually got coffee. I told myself it was harmless, ordinary, safe, and that was what I wanted most after losing my parents. Something safe, something warm, something that didn't remind me of empty rooms and quiet holidays. Mark proposed 6 months later, not with a diamond ring, but with a thin band woven from grass, made during a walk near the lake behind my house. He said he didn't want our love to start with debt or expectations. He said he didn't have much, only promises. And he promised I would never feel alone again. I remember laughing through tears and saying yes before he even finished speaking, because at that moment, I didn't need proof or paperwork. I needed to believe that someone saw me and chose me, without asking about my possessions. Linda arrived 2 weeks after the engagement, carrying an old suitcase and a tired smile. She said she had sold her small house in Texas after Mark's father passed. She said starting over felt easier, closer to her only son. Her voice trembled when she talked about faith and family. When I offered her the guest room, she held my hands and thanked God out loud for sending her an angel. I told myself it was temporary, generous, the right thing to do. And for a while, it even felt that way. But the changes started quietly, small enough to ignore. The gray curtains I loved disappeared, replaced with heavy floral ones. Linda said, felt warmer. The housekeeper I trusted was suddenly unnecessary, because Linda insisted she enjoyed cooking and cleaning. My dog was no longer allowed in the bedroom because it shed too much. And Mark? He always stood between us, his gentle smile in place, saying his mother meant well, saying she was old-fashioned, saying I was too sensitive. And every time, I swallowed my discomfort, because marriage, I believed, meant compromise. Then, money entered the conversation. Slowly, wrapped in frustration and apologies. Mark talked about a challenging market, about clients pulling out at the last minute. He started needing my credit card for marketing expenses. However, the charges didn't appear to be advertising. They looked like restaurants and spas. When I asked, he kissed my forehead and said entertaining clients was part of the job. I wanted to trust him. So I did. Even when a quiet voice in my head kept asking questions I wasn't ready to answer, I remained silent. That night in the hallway took all my excuses away. I stood frozen in the shadows, clutching my phone. Without thinking, my thumb slid across the screen and pressed the record button. I captured every word. The future I imagined collapsed into something sharp and cold. Instead of reacting, I stepped back. I returned to my room and lay down beside the man who thought I was already trapped. My heart pounded. My hands shook under the blanket. I stared at the ceiling, counting my breaths, realizing that love hadn't blinded me. It had tested me, and now, it was my turn to decide who I was going to be. If you've ever been in a similar situation, please share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to hear what happened next. Nothing felt like a threat. The changes arrived quietly, almost politely. the kind of adjustments people call harmless when they don't belong to them. One morning, I woke up, and the gray curtains I had chosen with my mother years ago were gone, replaced by thick, floral ones that blocked out the light. Linda stood in the kitchen, smiling. She said the house felt warmer this way, cozier, and I told myself it didn't matter. Curtains were just curtains. Light could come from somewhere else. A week later, the housekeeper failed to appear. Linda explained she had told her not to return, because family should take care of family. She said it with pride, like she had done me a favor. But the kitchen smelled different after that. Heavier, unfamiliar. My routines began to shift without anyone asking. And whenever I mentioned it, Mark brushed it off. He would wrap an arm around my waist, saying his mother liked feeling useful, that it gave her purpose. And again, I swallowed my discomfort, because I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. Then, my dog stopped sleeping at the foot of my bed. Linda said the shedding triggered her allergies. She said it sweetly, apologetically. Mark nodded along, promising it was temporary. So I moved the dog's bed to the hallway. Listening to him whine the first few nights softly made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. It felt like watching a door close. Very slowly, Mark became the bridge between us. Or at least, he liked to think so. Every time I hesitated or asked a question, he would pull me aside and lower his voice, telling me he felt stuck in the middle, telling me he hated seeing the two women he loved struggle to get along. His words were gentle, practiced, and somehow, they always left me apologizing, even when I couldn't remember what I had done wrong. Money entered our conversations the same way the curtains had entered the house. Quietly, without ceremony. Mark mentioned the real estate market is slowing down. Clients hesitating, deals falling through. He said it casually at first, over dinner, as if he were talking about the weather. Then one night, he asked if he could use my credit card to cover some marketing costs. Just for a little while, he promised, until the next commission came through. I handed it to him without hesitation, because trust had become my habit. The statements arrived weeks later. Restaurant names I recognized from glossy magazines. Spa charges I didn't remember visiting. When I asked, Mark laughed softly. He explained those were client meetings, that appearances mattered in his business. He kissed my forehead the way he always did when he wanted the conversation to end, and I let it end, even though the unease stayed with me long after the lights were turned off. Linda began asking questions that sounded like concern. She wondered whether the house was fully paid off, whether my parents had left everything in a trust, whether Mark's name would eventually be added to the accounts. Her tone stayed gentle, curious, and whenever I hesitated, she reminded me that marriage meant unity, that holding back created distance, that love thrived on transparency. I nodded and smiled, even as a quiet part of me started to feel smaller in my own home. I noticed my music stopped playing in the mornings. The old jazz records my father loved were replaced with the gospel radio that Linda preferred. The walls felt different without the familiar sounds. And when I reached to change the station, Linda watched me closely. Her smile never faded. She said she liked starting the day with prayer. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent request for patience. By the end of that month, I found myself hesitating before speaking in my own kitchen, measuring my words, adjusting my tone, waiting for approval that never came. The house still belonged to me on paper, yet it no longer felt like mine. And the strangest part was how normal everyone else seemed to be, as if this slow erasure was simply the cost of love. Somewhere deep down, a warning kept trying to surface, but I kept pushing it away, telling myself that doubt was selfish, that discomfort was temporary, that marriage required sacrifice. So I stayed quiet, unaware that my silence was being carefully noted, catalogued, and mistaken for consent. Real cracks showed up on a piece of paper. A credit card statement lay on the kitchen counter. Thin, quiet, impossible to ignore. As I read the lines one by one, the story Mark had been telling me began to fall apart. Waterfront restaurants, Private lounges, luxury spas. These were not the marks of someone barely holding a business together. They looked like the habits of someone spending ahead of certainty. That evening, I slid the statement across the table. I asked if he could explain it. He barely looked down. He smiled, relaxed. He said those were client meetings, the kind that kept deals alive. Success, he told me, needs to look like success. Then came the familiar question. Light, almost playful, asking if I trusted him. I nodded, because nodding was easier than pressing further. And the moment passed without resolution. But the statements kept coming. Faster, closer together. Always on weekends, always late at night. I began to notice how quickly conversations shifted when money appeared, how smoothly reassurance replaced answers, how often Linda happened to be nearby when those topics surfaced, listening without appearing to listen. Her questions arrived gently, disguised as curiosity. She admired how thoughtful my parents had been. She wondered out loud how flexible a trust could be. Each question floated by on its own, soft and reasonable, yet together. They traced a shape I did not want to see. I told myself I was imagining things. I blamed stress. I blamed grief. Still, the feeling stayed with me long enough that I called Chloe. I spoke carefully, almost apologetically. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she asked for Mark's full name and his date of birth. The warmth left her voice. What replaced it was calm, exact, and unsettling. A few days later, she stood in my kitchen with her laptop open. She showed me numbers that did not match the man sleeping beside me. A credit score buried deep, loans stacked on top of loans, missed payments stretching back years. I tried to explain it away. I repeated what I had been told about a slow market. Chloe turned the laptop screen toward me. Her voice was flat, deadly. Sarah, look at the dates. This isn't a slow market. This is a man drowning, and he's using you as his life raft. Then another record appeared on the screen. Older, less obvious. Linda's name sat there, attached to an insurance fraud case settled long ago. I shook my head. I pointed out church services, prayer, and the kindness she performed so well. Chloe didn't argue. She just closed the laptop and looked me in the eye. You think he loves you because he's patient? No. Predators are patient, Sarah. They don't want your money. They want access. And silence is the easiest key to give them. I defended them harder than I expected. But that night, I stayed quiet on purpose. Over dinner, I brought up the idea of a prenup, casually, framed as something unromantic, unnecessary, just to see their reaction. Mark didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just looked hurt, deeply hurt. He reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Baby, if a piece of paper makes you feel safe, I'll sign it. I just hate that we need lawyers to promise what our hearts already know. The relief on Linda's face was immediate, almost involuntary. It lasted only a second, but it lasted long enough. Lying awake later, I replayed his voice. What our hearts already know. For the first time, the truth felt clear. I was not being folded into a family. I was being positioned inside a plan. From then on, I stopped filling the gaps. I stopped offering explanations. I listened. And with every quiet moment, the story revealed itself faster than any confrontation ever could. Once I understood the pattern, I stopped reacting to it. I became agreeable. I became calm. I became exactly who they needed me to be. The concerned questions disappeared. The hesitation softened. I smiled more. I nodded sooner. And almost immediately, the atmosphere in the house changed. I started saying things I had never said before. We may be overthinking money. That marriage meant sharing both risks and rewards. That love should feel generous, not cautious. Each sentence landed perfectly. Each one loosened something in Mark's posture. His shoulders relaxed. His voice grew lighter. The tension he carried finally slipped. One evening, while scrolling through my phone, I mentioned a conversation with my financial advisor, just casually. Just enough. He says the trust is surprisingly stable. Most of the assets are liquid now. Transfers are actually easier than people imagine. The room went very quiet. Then came a simple question from Mark. Careful, almost innocent. Really? How long would something like that take? I shrugged, not looking up from my screen. A few days, maybe a week. Once we're officially family, the paperwork moves fast. I didn't need to look up. I could feel the shift in the air. That night, Mark was affectionate in a way he had not been for weeks. He talked about the future with enthusiasm, about opportunities. He spoke about how proud he was of us. He said everything finally felt aligned. I listened. I let him talk. I let him believe. A few days later, I brought up the wedding. I said I didn't want anything small. I wanted something memorable, something elegant, something that reflected who we were becoming. The response came too quickly. He said we deserved it. He said people needed to see our success. He said moments like this happened once in a lifetime. So I suggested the resort, one of the most expensive in Seattle. I said it half-jokingly, but the idea was picked up instantly. Numbers were discussed out loud. Venues, catering, music. A rehearsal dinner overlooking the water. The total climbed fast. No one flinched. Then, I introduced the final piece, the lock on the cage. I looked at Mark, my voice full of trust. It makes sense for you to handle the contracts, Mark. Vendors respect the groom more. It looks better if everything is under your name. I paused, then added the sweetener. I'll transfer the full amount into our joint account right after the rehearsal dinner. It'll be my wedding gift. The question came quietly. Can you put that in writing? Just for planning purposes. I smiled. Of course. The next morning, I showed him an email on my phone. It was a fake draft I had created, but it looked flawless. The subject line was clear. Approved. Transfer scheduled. Amount listed in full. The date is set for the Monday after the wedding. It looked official. It sounded final. It was everything they needed. The reaction was immediate. Excitement replaced restraint. Shopping replaced caution. New suits appeared. Jewelry boxes arrived. A luxury car brochure sat openly on the counter. Conversations shifted from if to when, from careful to bold. They began spending money they did not have. They started borrowing against a future that only existed in their minds. Mark started inviting people, business contacts, old friends, people I had never met. He spoke louder. He laughed harder. He told stories about our life together that felt rehearsed. Linda watched all of it with quiet satisfaction. She talked about family legacy, about blessings, about how proud my parents would be. I stayed steady. I praised their choices. I encouraged the scale. I said it should be impressive. I said, once the money comes through on Monday, none of this cost will matter. And they believed me, they thought, because greed needs confirmation more than it needs proof. At night, when I was alone, I rehearsed nothing. I documented everything. Messages, emails, contracts signed in Mark's name. I spoke to Chloe in short, precise calls. No emotion, just facts. The plan did not need anger. It needed timing. By the time the rehearsal dinner approached, they were fully committed. Financially, publicly, emotionally. No exit did not look like failure, and they had no idea. They had already crossed the point of no return. The rehearsal dinner unfolded exactly the way they had imagined it. Soft lights, crystal glasses, a long table facing the water. Laughter floated effortlessly across the room. People spoke about love, timing, and destiny. Every word felt rehearsed, even when it wasn't. I sat at the center, calm, attentive, smiling when expected, listening when necessary. Mark stood to speak, lifting his glass high. He preached about gratitude, about believing in love over money. He looked me in the eye and talked about finding someone who never asked for more than honesty. Applause followed, heads nodded, whispered that it was beautiful. but I saw what they didn't. His hands shaking slightly as he set the glass down. When it was my turn, I didn't raise a toast. I reached for the microphone. "I want to share something meaningful," I said. "It will only take a minute." The room quieted. Chairs stopped shifting. Cutlery stilled. I pressed a button on my phone. The speakers crackled. Static filled the space for a second too long. Then, a voice came through. Familiar, confident, laughing. "Once she signs, she won't leave this house on her own again." Then a second voice joined in. Softer, calculated. "We just need to wait until the baby comes. Then the trust unlocks." No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was heavy enough to press against my chest. I watched Mark's face change in real time. The color drained. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Crash. His mother's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. I let the recording play until the last word faded. Then I turned the volume down. I did not rush. I did not explain. I simply looked at them. Mark laughed first. Too fast. Too loud. It's taken out of context," he stammered. "Everyone misunderstood. It's a joke." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. He hissed, "We can talk privately." I looked him dead in the eye. There is nothing left to clarify. I turned to the guests, my voice steady. "Earlier this afternoon, I finalized a transfer. I restructured my trust." I paused, making sure Linda heard every word. "The majority of my liquid assets have been transferred permanently to a charitable foundation. The remainder is locked for a decade." Whispers spread across the room like wildfire. Someone gasped. I looked back at Mark. "I did this to ensure our marriage was based on love, not money. But since the love was a lie, there will be no marriage." Mark's face twisted. "What about the deposits? The contracts? The joint account?" I smiled. A cold, sharp smile. "Check the paperwork, Mark. Those obligations are under your name, your signature, your credit." I leaned in closer. "I haven't signed a single loan." His voice broke when he said my name. I did not answer. A manager approached the table quietly, holding a bill. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Davis, there's an issue with payment authorization. The remaining balance of $40,000 needs to be settled immediately." "AD," the number echoed in the silent room. Mark started arguing, his words tangling together in a jumble. Linda cried out, demanding I fix it, demanding fairness. I said nothing. Security stepped closer. Guests stood up. Phones came out to record the ruin. Someone mentioned the police. Someone else mentioned debt collectors. I simply picked up my bag. As I walked away, I heard Mark calling after me. I heard promises. I heard anger. I heard fear. I did not turn around. The doors closed behind me with a soft sound. It felt like the end of a long nightmare. And finally, it felt like silence. I had only taken a few steps away from the table when the dream collapsed behind me. A sharp voice cut through the noise, demanding payment. Then another, colder, asking for identification. The calm tone of authority filled the room faster than panic ever could. The resort manager stepped in, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need this settled now." The authorization failed. Mark spun around, his face twisted in disbelief. "That's impossible. The money is coming on Monday." The manager didn't blink. "Monday doesn't pay for tonight, sir." Linda rushed forward, clutching her purse like a shield. "This is a misunderstanding. My son's fiancé will fix this." I stopped. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "I'm not fixing anything. I'm leaving." Mark stepped closer. Too close. His voice dropped to a desperate growl. "Sarah, please. You don't understand what you're doing." I looked at him. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." His hand reached out to grab me, but security moved faster. A heavy hand landed on Mark's chest. "Sir, step back." Now, the room erupted. Guests whispered. Chairs scraped against the floor. Phones were lifted openly now, recording the ruin. Mark shouted my name again over the shoulder of the guard. "We can talk. Just talk to me." I shook my head. There's nothing left to discuss. Victor returned with a printed receipt, the paper long and damning. He pointed to the total. "This balance needs to be resolved immediately, or we involve law enforcement." Mark laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. "Call whoever you want. This is a private matter." The manager's reply was calm. Ice cold. Not anymore. Linda's composure finally cracked. She screamed, her face red and distorted. "You did this on purpose. You set him up." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You planned to take everything from me." I just stopped it. The air grew heavy with words like creditors, fraud, and loans. Mark's face drained of color again. "But you told me it was approved. You showed me the email." I nodded once. "I showed you exactly what your greed wanted to see." Sirens began to echo faintly outside. Perhaps they were coming to settle the bill for something else. It no longer mattered. The effect was instant. Mark stepped back. His confidence collapsed in stages. "Please," he whispered. This time, he sounded small. I walked toward the exit. Behind me, Linda cried out one last threat. "You'll regret this." I paused at the heavy double doors. I spoke without turning around. "No, I'll remember it." Outside, the night air felt cold, clean. I got into my car. As I closed the door, I heard shouting break into arguments inside the lobby. I heard my name used like a bargaining chip one last time. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, drowning them out. For the first time in months, the silence that followed didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. The house felt different when I returned. Not larger, not smaller, just honest. It was the kind of quiet that does not ask anything from you. I placed my bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, listening to nothing, and for the first time in a long while, nothing listened back. I poured a glass of wine from the bottle my father had saved for a special day. I used to think that day had to be joyful. I understood now that it only had to be true. I sat by the fireplace, letting the warmth settle into my hands. The shaking was gone. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I did not reach for it. I already knew what it would contain. Apologies shaped like excuses. Anger dressed as heartbreak. Promises that arrived too late to be of any consequence. I turned the screen over. Silence felt healthier. Later that night, Chloe called. I answered this time. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked if I was safe. I said yes. She paused, then spoke softly. "You did exactly what you needed to do." I closed my eyes. I finally listened, Chloe. She didn't respond right away. When she did, I could hear the smile in her voice. That's how it starts. The next few days were quiet in a different way. Lawyers handled the rest. Documents replaced drama. Boundaries did the work that emotions never could. The house stayed mine. The trust stayed protected. Their voices faded into something distant, irrelevant. One afternoon, I walked through the rooms and noticed small things returning to their places. The jazz records went back on the shelf. The curtains were opened wide. Light filled the space without permission. My dog followed me everywhere, tail wagging, like he had been waiting for me to come back to myself. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of all this. The one who confused generosity with obligation. The one who believed love required shrinking. I didn't feel embarrassed by her. I felt grateful. She survived long enough to learn. That night, standing by the window, I spoke out loud for the first time since everything ended. "You're allowed to take up space." The words felt strange. Then, they felt right. I did not feel victorious. I felt clear. I did not feel cruel. I felt finished. The story had not ended with revenge. It ended with truth. And truth, I learned, is the most expensive lesson of all. But it is still cheaper than selling your future to people who only see you as a resource. I turned off the lights and let the house rest. Tomorrow would come, and for once, it would be on my terms.